Hello and welcome to episode 18 of In Pursuit of Clarity, entitled A Ban on Advertising. I've given this episode a provocative title, very consciously. The English writer Samuel Johnson famously stated, "The chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken." This isn't only true at the individual level, but the cultural and societal and national equally so. We fall into ways of doing things, often half-mindlessly, with our attentions directed elsewhere, and once a habit is kick-started, it's a bit like laying down a rail, providing for ease of movement. From this point forward, it'll be made heavy use of. It's quicker, easier, more comfortable, and the subconscious line of thinking goes something like, if it's good enough for others, it's probably good enough for us. So as a people and a nation, we cease to question things, and concepts such as democracy, or our current form of capitalism, to use two prominent examples, become sacred cows, taboo subjects largely above criticism. Or, even, if we're being honest, above critical thinking. It's very safe to embrace them and parrot what we've been told are their high points. It's extremely difficult to speak about their potential ill effects, to suggest they may be deeply flawed. Socially or professionally, the former is the path of promotion and least resistance. The latter is the path of backlash and uphill battles, and career suicide. It's because of this that bad ideas can take such firm root and grow and extend their branches far and wide. The best counter to this is to be willing to play devil's advocate. Although ironically, when society becomes so deeply sick and confused and chaotic, the proper term here actually might be God's advocate, and to attempt broader level objective analysis of the actual net effects of these ideas. The modern world has a way of forcing us down rails of deeply questionable construction, and even asking that we not look out the windows to the broad expanse around us as we do, but maintain a myopic focus straight ahead. The role played by advertising in our specific brand of capitalism is an example of one of these issues virtually nobody questions seriously. Its utility is taken as a given, and some even laud it as aiding in the creation of a meritocratic environment within our consumer capitalism. After all, the argument goes, what better way to ensure the best man or best product wins out than by having every side make its most convincing pitch, at which point the sovereign and independent-minded individual can make his now informed mind up among these choices. I believe this to be the best argument in favor of the type of advertising that dominates our day, and on its face, it's fairly convincing. But in an effort to obliterate the rails of guided thought and consider another perspective, let's examine this line of thinking a bit more deeply. It's my belief that the term advertising is almost directly synonymous with the word hype or manipulation. One could even make a convincing argument for it being synonymous with deceit. When one pulls back to examine the essence of what advertising is, and let's use consumer and commercial advertising as our example in this case, it's the process of convincing someone to obtain a product or service that in most cases they didn't know they wanted or needed. And of course, in most cases, don't actually want or need. That want is artificially generated. The means of doing this are fairly uniform and consistent. You highlight or exaggerate the positive aspects of whatever it is that's being sold, while minimizing or hiding entirely the negative aspects, and use various visual or auditory devices to cause your pitch to appear more authoritative, genuine, honest, and important. These can be images of a person beaming with happiness due to the brilliance of whatever it is that's being marketed, or filled with frustration or depression from the lack of it. But in our modern age, this even extends into the choice of color schemes, the choice of actor or actress for a commercial, font type or size for websites or any printed word, or the addictive jingle being made use of. All of which are now scientifically designed and tested, more often than not, for maximum psychological effect. Now, if most of us are in agreement based on the wealth of evidence that now exists that real happiness and fulfillment doesn't arise out of material possessions or ministering to our every instant gratification impulse, and in fact, that many of these possessions, and especially the constant pursuit of them, seems to have the exact opposite effect, then from here we simply have to admit that consumer advertising, very broadly speaking, is a pernicious lie. Worse, it's a collection of tens of thousands of lies, which we're bombarded with throughout every waking hour of every single day of our lives. Though most of us recognize those ecstatic faces on television radiating health and happiness as they try this product or that service are deceiving us, I think we rarely stop to think about the net psychological effect of living in a society in which a massive percentage of our sensory input is now made up of pure, shameless deception. Still worse, think about what this environment does to the impressionable minds of children. They learn, early and often in stark terms, that the majority of what they see and hear in the world is exaggeration, mischaracterization, manipulation, and deceit. Whether they recognize this consciously, which sadly is the best case scenario here, or as a subconscious recognition, it creates an impression of the world around them that shapes their approach to the world at large from that point forward. Because children are like sponges, soaking up everything around them, and especially eager to find norms of behavior to emulate, the net effect of this massive poison they take in is to normalize deception and exaggeration, and still worse, normalize the idea of engaging in dishonest behavior for personal gain, which, after all, is precisely what occurs in the majority of advertising. In a world in which the conception of God has rapidly disappeared into the background and money has become our prime driving force, those best at or most willing to devote themselves to its attainment naturally rise to positions of leaders and dominant influences and guiding hands. And those that fit this description are often, by definition, those that lack depth and substance, because no other type of human being would see a quest for things as the fundamental purpose of existence. The most shameless and scheming rise to the top of this heap over time, inevitably. This is essentially a guarantee. And this is a small type of human being, struggling in vain to fill a void within, who've lost the ability to even conceive of a higher type of existence. They no longer have the reference points in most cases. It's a language they simply can't speak. Advertising, however, is a language they can and do speak, oftentimes masterfully well. The twisting of a word here, the overemphasis there, the lie of omission here and deceptive wordplay there, merely being ignoble and base frees an individual to use vastly more effective means and methods of winning on this playing field. If the world is a nihilistic and meaningless rat race, why not be the best rat? To the type of person that seeks beauty, that seeks to see the world as beautiful, that seeks the lofty and transcendent and profound, and the greatness in thought and deed that this healthy environment naturally inspires, being completely surrounded by those willing to forego the most fundamental ethics and virtues in exchange for a few extra bucks is soul-crushing, and I've come to believe it represents a fundamental flaw in the way we've fallen into doing things. And consider for a moment the collective waste of time and talent. Huge teams composed of some of the most capable minds of our generation, as well as immense amounts of time and energy, are now being harnessed for the sole purpose of creating temptations to entice you to spend money, which represents your own time and energy, to purchase distractions. To pull one example out of thin air, let's use the food and beverage industry. How much intellectual energy is being devoted across all major companies, from Pepsi to Coke and everything in between, in attempts to point people towards their specific type of sugary water. Imagine if this same intellectual energy were devoted to something productive. One of the voices on the right that I personally respect most was ironically asked the direct question as I was jotting notes for this podcast, "Do you think advertising should be banned?" And although he was being put on the spot and forced to answer a big question without being able to give it much thought, I was still surprised to hear him immediately shoot back the answer of something like, "No, only deceptive or dishonest advertising should be banned." This sounds great on the surface, but it's also an impossibility. There's no clear dividing line to be drawn, no black and white difference between honest and deceptive advertising. Those ecstatically happy characters on TV having just tried a product which has apparently made their lives complete. Is this deceptive or dishonest? Who draws this line? So, as a thought experiment, let's consider the possibility of a nation or society literally banning advertising. No commercials, no billboards, no pop-ups or banner ads, and having software built accordingly to block all attempts online and impose heavy fines for offline violations. More importantly, let's envision a culture that's recognized the detrimental effects with a religious fervor, and now considers advertisements to be gaudy and classless, causing those who violate the laws here often to do more harm than good to the brand they're trying to boost. Let's further envision, just for the sake of argument, that all products and services are now judged in an entirely evidence-based manner. Picture a construct a bit like jury duty, in which the public was called in at random and compensated for their time, and over a period of a few days were given several products and services, perhaps of their choosing, to objectively evaluate across a number of metrics. Perhaps a free ticket to an ocean cruise, after which they evaluate the food, environment, the staff they encountered, etc. Perhaps they're provided with 2 competitor products of their choosing while on that cruise, with the request that they use each equally and provide an evaluation of these as well. The same with various food and drink products they take in during this period. I don't want to digress too deeply here, but the point is that an entirely evidence-based structure might be devised, in which those doing the evaluating are objective parties with nothing to gain or lose based on their feedback and opinions. This collective feedback would then be fed into a database, accessible online or offline in various formats, by anyone seeking to make use of any sort of purchase. No longer would companies dominate simply by using teams of brand managers and hype men to create a facade of excellence. They'd have to actually be excellent, in a black and white, no excuses fashion. Consumers looking to buy a television could query the resulting database and be assured they were reading objective, evidence-based data, reviews, and ratings produced by a wide range of individuals with absolutely no incentives to lie or hype in one direction or another. I know this sounds radical, and it is, and I think any good thought experiment, the purpose of which is to broaden perspectives, should be. But although the details and specifics might be pursued or implemented differently than I've quickly laid out here, the core concept isn't impossible by any means. Our world is constructed in the present manner because we've allowed it to be, and because we've grown comfortable and accustomed to it being so, at least enough to tolerate it. I think sometimes we forget that there are a near infinite number of combinations of other ways of living. Tolerating one that's seriously subpar, even soul-deadening and draining, is blindness or weakness, or some combination of the two. Those like Ben Shapiro and his ilk claim to view our consumerist structure as being the peak of human development, the healthiest and happiest, but perhaps it's actually closer to the opposite. Why surround ourselves with temptations for things that are ultimately unhealthy? What if our purpose on this earth was bigger than mere consumption? Why allow for a sea of distractions and false hopes, causing people to constantly chase their tails in the hopes that the next set of purchases will be the one that brings contentment? A child surrounded by sugar may be happy, but deeply contented or fulfilled, with a chance of long-term happiness? Not so much. In summary, if the system and construct within which we all live and operate encourages exaggeration and even outright deceit as one of its main components, perhaps the entire edifice is sickly and needs to be reconsidered. We deserve better than forced immersion in such an environment from cradle to grave. This issue, as with so many others, is part of a battleground on which there are essentially 2 archetypal forces at work. One exclusively focuses on all that's most base and ignoble in humanity, claiming this is human nature. Another that focuses more on what's lofty and great in mankind, and views this vast potential as human nature, a nature that's currently lying dormant in a corrupted humanity that's been confused and tied in knots. The one aims downward and seeks to cater to all manner of vice to optimally profit during the free fall. The other aims upwards and has very different goals. I tend to think we're under the sway of the former at present, but I'm hopeful this tide is turning. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my own.